Hello and welcome to this Affinity Photo adaptation of a Photoshop tutorial. The Photoshop tutorial was quite recent. It went up in January 2019 and it's done by Blue Lightning TV Photoshop. I will add a link to this video so you can watch it yourself and sort of maybe make some alterations that I didn't do. For one thing, he has this texture in the black area, which I've so far not been able to manage to work out how to do that. Not successfully anyway. Also, he makes this quite a sort of a fairly smallish size, but I'm just gonna keep the size of the original picture, but I will make it square like this because I think that works quite well. And when I first tried this, I came out with this result, but I made quite a lot of errors, and also I didn't make any notes of how I was sort of trying to follow on. So I had a second attempt, which was this one. This time I did make some notes and was able to reproduce like the results each time. And then this last one here is where we're sort of a sort of image like we're aiming for, because I've added this sort of halo effect, and I've also added some text. And this text I did in Affinity Designer because you can't really do text on a path in Affinity Photo. So if you're going to add text in Photo, you're going to have to just sort of do it straight or warp it in some way. But I will, in this particular video, I will transfer to Designer to add text at the end. So I'll get rid of some of these images and I'll be back. Okay, for this tutorial you're going to need a portrait image. The cleaner the background the better, because you're going to be sort of deleting that. I'm going to try this picture, which I'm going to get from Pixabay.com. I've never used this in a practice, so I have no idea how this will end up looking, so it's going to be new to me as well. And another thing you're going to need is a texture, which I've got this sort of vellum paper, again from Pixabay.com, and links to both of these images will be in the description for this video. So this is the image I'm going to go for. First thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just crop it so we have a square size. Now the size of this is 6000 by 4000, so I'm going to try and crop this to roughly 4000 by 4000 if I can. We're going to go to a custom ratio of 4000 by 4000. Move this to where I want this to be, which is going to be about there. So there we have our centered image. What I'm going to have to do, I'm going to have to export this first, and then I will load it and I will be back. Right, technically I didn't necessarily have to save what I'd cropped, but I personally find it a lot easier to work with an image that has not got sort of hidden parts of it that have in an area that's cropped off, so if I make any errors it may affect the end image. So I personally prefer to export something like that and then bring it back as an image that is that size, and I know it's not going to alter. But you don't necessarily have to export it and bring it back in. That's just my personal preference. So once you have your image cropped into a square, or as square as you want to get it, we then need to make a selection. Now if this was an all one color background, it probably would be easier to use a selection brush and select the outside area, and then once you've made your selection, invert it. Now as this isn't a sort of fairly clean background, what I'm going to do is select the portrait itself. So I've got the selection brush, I'm on add, I'm going to make the brush size a bit bigger, maybe not that big, and start making selections. Now for this, you don't necessarily have to be 100% perfectly brilliant, because it's going to end up looking a fairly rough and abstract image. It's just the basic facial features that we want. And if you come up here to quick mask and just click on that, it will show everything that has been selected. So if there are any bits in the middle that you've missed, you could then select them. So I've got all the main features of the face. Some of the hairs are missing, but I'm going to try and get a few of them. So I'm going to come on to refine and increase the brush, and then just get some of those, especially the bigger hairs from that area. I'm not going to worry too much about wispy hairs of the beard and what have you, because they're not going to show up. I'll just go over that area once more, I think. Yes, I'm quite happy with that. And then I'm going to change the output from selection to new layer with mask, and then click apply. So this will add a new layer above the background, and it already has a mask getting rid of the background. So that is that part finished. So just make sure that it is this layer that is highlighted, the new one that we've just made. And what I'm going to do, you don't necessarily have to do this, but I think this is slightly easier. I'm going to right click this, and I'm going to make that into a group, because some people don't, we're going to be adding sort of extra adjustments and what have you, and some people are not too happy about dragging them down and getting it right and making these join up into a group. So if you make this into a group to start with, and then you highlight the layer that you want to add the adjustments to, when you add those adjustments, it will automatically all be grouped together. So it sort of makes that slightly easier for some people who struggle with moving layers up and down and getting them in the right place. So what I will do, well, I'll just rename that group, and I'll just call it man. Make sure, again, come back down and make sure that it is this layer that is highlighted. Now we're going to add a Gaussian blur filter. Now you could do this like from filters, blur, Gaussian blur. The only trouble with that is once you've done it, that is it. You can't make any alterations. So this time what we want is to go to the layer menu, and then new live filter, Gaussian blur filter. So this means this has been added to the group, and we can always come back to it whenever we want to, because we're going to be tinkering with the Gaussian blur as we go along. So I'm just going to set this at 3 pixels to start with, and then just close that. Now I'm going to highlight that layer again, and then I'm going to come to the adjustments icon down here, click on that, and add a threshold adjustment. It will put that above that layer, but it is still within the group, so it will only affect like the group. So then it's just a case of moving the slider to the right to bring up as much as that image as you feel that you want. So that's it's on about 39%. Doesn't look too bad. Missing a bit down here, but there's not a lot down here to go with. But if I close that and I come back to the live filter and I double click on that, it will bring up the Gaussian blur, and you can adjust the Gaussian blur to bring back or take away as much of the detail as you want. Now, me personally, I quite like the extra features being visible. You might prefer a more sort of general abstract feel to it. So it's a personal taste thing, but you could say just tinker with the Gaussian blur and then come back to the threshold and tinker with that. So I've now moved it out to 44, so it's a case of going backwards and forwards between the threshold and the Gaussian blur and getting a result that you like the look of. Now, I personally quite like that, so I'm going to leave that on 44 and just double check on what this is set on. Oh, this is on 0.7. So like I said, it's just a case of tinkering with both settings, and because it is a live filter, the Gaussian blur, you can go back to it, whereas if you just used it from the filter menu, whatever you set it on to start with is what you had been stuck with. So now I'm happy with that. I'll just close that group, I'll highlight the group, and I'm going to add a layer above the main group, and I'm just going to fill this with a colour. Doesn't matter what colour at the moment because we're going to be changing it, but I'm just going to fill this, let's go with black. So that is now a solid colour, and we're now going to alter this with a gradient, but from the FX menu. So I'm going to click on the FX button here and come to gradient overlay. So I'll click on the, put a tick into gradient overlay and then click on the words just to give me the options. Now what we're going to go for is a radial. At the moment it's set on linear, so I'll drop this down and pick radial. I'm going to change the angle. At the moment it's on 0, but I'm going to click it so it's pointing straight upwards, 90 degrees. And I'm going to change the scale X. At the moment it's on 100%. I'm just going to raise this to 150. Oh, there we go, 151, that's close enough. And then I'm going to click on the representation of the gradient to open up the gradient editor. Now the colour on the left is currently set to black, which is the center, but I want white in there, or a just off white. So because this is the largest node, this is the colour that is being selected at the moment, so which is represented here. If I click into that, I can change the colours. Now I'm going to put in a hex colour. You don't have to go with the colours that I'm selecting. I'm just using the colours that came from the Photoshop tutorial, and the colour for this one was D3F3FF, which is not quite white, but it's not far off of being white. So I'm going to click on the right hand node to make that the bigger node and the selected colour. Again click in here and again pick the hex code, which is 002871, which is the blue colour. Like I said, you could have whatever colours that you want. So I can then close this And then what I'm going to do now is just drag this layer down so that that blue line comes all the way across, so that layer is now behind the man group. Now I'm going to highlight the main group, make that the top here, and I'm going to get, let's come off that tool, so get the texture. I'm just going to right click that, copy it, come back to a document, and then edit and paste that in. So I'm just going to resize this so it fills up the area that we want. Just to make it a little bit bigger at the top, just to make sure that I'm not missing anything. And then I'm going to change its blend mode from normal to color burn. Now I quite like it at 100%, but you could reduce that down just to make it a subtler texture. I mean, around the 75% mark is probably the lowest I would go if I was going to do it, but like I said, I like mine at 100%, so that is where I'm going to leave that. So next I want to highlight the, I'm going to rename that gradient. So I'm going to highlight that gradient layer, and I'm going to select a shape, and that shape is going to be the double star tool. Now up here we have the options for this tool, and I'm going to make the number of points the maximum, which is 48. The inner radius I'm going to drop down to 0, and the point radius I'm going to increase to maximum, which is 100%, and I'm going to make the stroke, at the moment is set on none. I'm going to set this on 3, and the colour is black, although the colour is not really that important at the moment, but I'll leave it on black. And then I'm going to, now you know, it does help if you make this snapping is on, because if you bring the cursor to the center, if you get it dead center, you'll get the green and red line from the snapping turning up, so you know that you're on center. Now as it says down here in the bottom here, holding down the shift will constrain the proportions, and holding down control will create it from the center point. So if I hold down the shift and the control when I'm in the center and then draw outwards, it will draw that out from the center and keep it in perspective, and then just keep going till all of those lines are pretty much going off the image. I haven't quite gone far enough, but now that's sort of made, I can just come down here and hold down the shift key and just keep dragging this out a bit until all of those lines now have sort of moved off center, which is not why maybe I should have held control. Let me just come back to the move tool and bring this back to the center. Right, so all those lines are pretty much going right off of the page now. So once you're happy with the position and what have you, I'm going to come to the FX button and click on that, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to drop the fill opacity, which is currently at 100%, down to 0. So there are no pixels in there at the moment, because we made the stroke 3, but that is sort of made all of the pixels invisible at the moment, but it doesn't mean you can't make alterations. So I'm going to come to the bevel emboss, click on, put a tick in there, select the options that I want by clicking on the words bevel emboss, and I'm going to change the type from pillow to inner, and the radius I'm going to increase up to 35. It's easier to type this in. Now these settings you can alter them to your personal taste. These are just the ones that I'm going with. Soften I'm going to make 4, and this black box here in the sort of profile, if you click in that, you get some various preset profiles, and I'm going to pick the very first one and close that. And then we're going to be changing the elevation, which you can do just by clicking on the dot and moving it around to wherever you think it looks good. But I'm going to set mine at -91 for the azimuth and 44 for the elevation. So it's basically straight down but not quite right at the bottom. And the shadow opacity is currently set on 75%. So I'm just going to click in that box there, and I'm going to increase the opacity of the shadow up to 100%. Now it is quite hard to see at the moment because you've got these blue lines from the move tool or whatever tool that is currently selected, that sort of going over the top of the area that we're trying to work on. So that does make it slightly difficult. So what we need to do now is just gradually bring up the fill opacity to bring back some of those pixels on the stroke. Now I personally am just going to go up to around the 10% mark. There we go. And then close that panel. If I come off of this tool, and then see the effect that we have here, just made from the embossing of the pixels, even though they weren't there to start with, and then just gradually bring back a few of those pixels. Now this would be the end of the Photoshop tutorial, and like I said, I haven't sort of managed to get the texture in the black areas of the image, but I have sort of got the texture in the background. So you could save and export at this point, but I'm going to sort of add a bit extra to this. So with the star layer highlighted, I'm going to change the tool to the ellipse tool. That's there. And I'm going to fill this color, stroke color, to white. Which at the moment I'm affecting. Let me go back to where it was. Right, let me add a layer, just make sure that I'm not affecting that double star layer that I'd already had there. In theory you shouldn't affect it, but it is. So I'm gonna, like I said, I'm gonna make the color white, and I'm going to increase the stroke up to 18, and much like before, I'm going to come to the center point, hold down Control and Shift, and then draw outwards, and this is going to be like the halo effect, so quite how far you want to move that is really up to you. Let me just come to that move tool, and I'm going to raise it up and move it so it's about there. I can now get rid of that pixel layer which I put in to protect the gap. I don't need that now. Let me just delete that. And once I'm on the ellipse, I'm going to come up to filter, and blur, and come to zoom blur, and I'm going to make this at 100 pixels percent, and wait for that to have an effect. Now you could reduce the opacity of this if you want to sort of just have it as a sort of a lighter glow around the outside. Let's come down a little bit more. That's around about the 30% mark. So come off that tool. So again, now at this point you could add the save and export this as a different image, and if you then wanted to add text, you could do, now this particular one I've now not, this doesn't really have enough room for me to do text on a path across the top of the image. I could possibly do it down round the side here and round the side there. I will have a go at that. So what I need to do is to export this into Designer. So let me just save this first, just to make sure that I don't ruin this. Right, let's just save. Right, so if I come up to File and then come down to Edit in Designer, it will open up Affinity Designer. We'll just have to wait a little while. So it has now transferred this into Affinity Designer and all the layers are intact. So now we just need to add the text on a tool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, let's go with, let's try the donut tool, and I'm gonna, not that it really matters too much about the color, but I'm going to just leave the stroke on white and the size on 18, and much like I did in photo, come to the center, hold down Control and Shift, and then draw out the donut from the center, and I'll probably just come slightly inside the halo effect now, and then come to the artistic text tool, and then as I come close to the circle, that icon, what's the word, the icon for the text handle changes to that T with a little squiggly line, which now means I can draw on a path. So if I click there, it will get rid of the donut, but has put the text cursor. So let's call this I don't know, I'll just about there. Highlight the text. I'm going to change the color of the text. I haven't highlighted it, I thought. Somehow I moved it. I don't know quite how I managed that. Let's try that again. It's very awkward with that. That's it. I'll move it up there for now. I was getting in the border was getting in the way of me being able to highlight the text. So I've highlighted the text now. I'm going to change the color to let's go with greys, so I can pick white. Increase the size. And then I'll write something on this side. Let me just go with the same phrase because I can't think of anything better. And it's just a case of tinkering with the spacing. There we go, I think that will do. So that is with the text added on a path in Designer, but the rest of it was done in Photo. You probably could do all of this in Designer as well. I must admit it's not something I've actually thought about, but it should all pretty much work the same in Designer as it does in Photo. So you could, if you have Designer, you could just do the whole thing in Designer in the same way. So that is basically it. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to save it under a new name, and goodbye.